Hi, I'm Eddie Patton, neurologist in Houston, Texas, and current chair of the Medical Economics Committee with the Texas Neurological Society. Welcome to this edition of the Business of Neurology. This video series is sponsored by the Texas Neurological Society to educate neurologists on certain business aspects of the practice of neurology. Are you fully covered? Do you have a savings plan regarding your retirement? Have you properly insured yourself to protect your livelihood and your family? Today we will be talking to Lee Daniels, who's a financial planner and exit planner, about retirement, disability insurance, and life insurance, as well as other important topics. Let me tell you more about Lee. Lee Daniels is the managing partner and co-founder of two organizations, Asset Professional and Exponential Equations, which provide financial services, accounting and tax services, and legal strategies for individuals, families, and small businesses. Prior to opening these firms in 2017, he served as a leader with Fortune 500 companies such as Waddell & Reed, Thrivent Financial, and U.S. Bank. During this time, he served as independent financial advisors, supporting them as they work with their clients. Lee has earned his MBA in finance from the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, as well as a Master's of Jurisprudence from the Texas A&M School of Law. In addition, Lee is a certified financial planner, a certified exit planner, and an enrolled agent candidate with the Internal Revenue Service. Lee currently lives in Cypress, Texas with his wife and daughter, and his practice is in Houston, Texas. Join me as I talk with Mr. Daniels about retirement, insurances, and making sure that we're fully covered and have fully thought out our financial future. Well, Lee, thank you for taking time out and talking with us about this critical topic. So first of all, as physicians, as neurologists, of course, we think that we know a lot and highly educated, but a lot of times we don't know finances. So I want to talk a little bit about how to select a financial advisor to help you plan for things like retirement and your financial freedom.
Sure. And thanks for having me, Dr. Patton.
Absolutely.
You know, I think in terms of selecting and finding your financial advisor, it's really important first and foremost that you like the person, and from just a personality perspective, you mesh, right? That you're working together to build a roadmap for you in the future. And so making sure that advisor fully understands what your goals are, where you've been so far, what you currently have, and then they can put a roadmap together for you to get you to where you're trying to go is really crucial. So many times someone will walk into a financial advisor's office and the conversation goes something like this, right? What do you have? Do you have statements? Thanks, give me your statements. They put together a proposal, and the very next meeting you're talking about, what you're gonna do with your money, right? And they don't take the time to really understand who you are as a person, who your family is, and some of those other things that really play into what your ultimate success should be.
And once you find a financial advisor, how are they compensated? What are the compensation models like for your advisor?
Yeah, so I think for people using financial advisors, they really need to understand the licensing requirements behind an advisor, because an advisor can be licensed in two separate ways. And one way is very transactional, where anything they put in front of you that you purchase from them, they're getting compensated on the back end by way of commission. And that was really common for years and years. And late 90s, early 2000s, the market got smart and it started to realize, really it should be more of a fee situation, where the advisor, number one, is a fiduciary, and so now they have fiduciary responsibility to their client. And what that really means is they have to make sure that anything they do for that client is in the client's best interests.
Sure.
And then secondly, getting away from this commission-based model where instead the client is paying a fee to the advisor on an annual basis to really instruct and inform their client of what their moves should be made inside their financial plan. And when you have a fee-based advisor, you're pretty much guaranteed that they're on the same path as you are, because their compensation stops if they're no longer have you as a client, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
And I assume, as with anything, it's good to have at least the same advisor or group throughout your life for continuity and know what's going on. But are there different types of advisors that specialize in different stages of a person's life, whether they are young in their career or more senior in their career, ready to retire?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing there, Dr. Patton, is that when you get a financial advisor at first, especially higher net worth clients that have sizable assets to invest, what tends to happen a lot of times is they'll start with an advisor who's really good at accumulating wealth. And so they're looking at their annual returns, or looking at making sure their wealth gets accumulated. The problem becomes that when you get to the point where you're several years away from retirement or getting into retirement, and you need to start to take a look at now distribution strategies, how I'm going to create income off my investments. For a lot of these investment advisors, they're comped solely on the assets they retain, right?
Okay.
And so they don't have a lot of interest in you using your money that you've accumulated over the years. So making sure you have an advisor that can also help you use the money you've accumulated in your retirement years is really important.
That is important. I've heard from several members, and that was always one of the things that you hear is that they'll go in and meet with someone, with an advisor that maybe only focuses on a certain type of asset class or retirement versus what they're really looking for. So very important for physicians to think about. And I guess a follow-up question to that is, how much should I expect to pay for someone to help me out to organize my finances?
Yeah, and so there's really three different things to consider when you're paying someone. Consideration number one is if they're managing your assets, they're going to charge a percentage fee to manage those assets, and that should be somewhere between 0.5% and 1%. You get much over 1%, they're pretty expensive to manage your assets. The second piece of that is, they're probably going to be charging you for advice on an annual basis, putting your financial plan together, helping you with estate planning, accumulation, all that. And, typically a client is going to pay somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 a year on that advisory fee-based perspective. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing to keep in mind, if you're buying insurance products from a financial advisor, there's no cost to you in terms of paying the advisor directly, but just keep in mind that any of those products have associated fees built into them, and that product is paying the financial advisor.
Okay, through the fees.
Through the fees, right? So when you go out and you get a life insurance policy, for example, you're not going to see any kind of fee structure in that life insurance policy you buy, but no, the advisor is getting paid on the back end for placing that product. Yeah.
And speaking of retirement, I'd like to take a few minutes to focus in on retirement. Of course, everyone wants to put money away and wants to put themselves in a position when they are ready to step away from seeing patients. They have enough to live their quality of life and sustain them. Are there some general rules or formulas that you can give the viewers as you're trying to figure out in your stage in your career, how do I build this nest egg? How do I build this retirement account? Are there any general rules or formulas you can give?
I always tell the story to my clients that, if you remember several years ago, there was a commercial on TV and people would walk around and say, my number is 2.5 million, and they'd have the number above their head. You remember that? And everyone had their number. The issue I think that becomes with that is that analysis typically makes the assumption that I've accumulated wealth through my years of working, and that I'm going to start taking interest, dividends, and income off that magic number, but I'm not going to touch that magic number. That magic number, that principle is going to stay intact.
Okay.
And so what that typically means for a client is they need much more to retire on because the principle they're never going to be using. Mm-hmm. But a lot of clients that walk in my door, and I say, well, are you planning on leaving $3 million to your kids? They're like, no, I could care less, right? And if you don't care about retaining that principal because you're not trying to leave that much to your next generation, then your number is much lower because you can take both principal and return as you're living in retirement. Okay. So, long answer to your short question, but there's no magic number, but there is planning to be done to understand how you're going to use your money in retirement, which will then ultimately dictate what you're trying to accumulate before you retire.
Excellent. Okay.
Okay.
And in general, in your opinion, can you give an overview of some of the different type of retirement plans, like the 401ks or Roth IRAs and so forth?
Yeah, so for an employer, they really have several different options, and the primary ones are a 401k plan, what they call a SEP plan, or a simple IRA plan. And all three of those plans are designed for not only the employer, but also for the employees. 401k by far is the most common plan that a doctor would put in place. But then, in terms of other retirement, it becomes a little difficult for a doctor, because if you have a 401k plan and you're actually contributing to that plan, it doesn't allow you to put money away in other retirement plans. Oh. It's an IRS regulation, right? And so, and there's caveats to that, right? So if I'm a neurologist, but then on the side I have another business, like yourself, right? Another business venture going on, you can put a retirement plan in that business venture because that's a separate business entity that allows for a separate retirement plan.
Excellent. So this is where that old important notion of, particularly if you are employed, make sure you read your contract, because within the benefits, I remember my first contract, there was a defined benefit plan, yep, and then a 401, and I didn't understand what then they were asking me what percentage did I want to put away. Yeah. So I found it very helpful to meet with my attorneys and financial planners at that time and make sure that you've got that figured out.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Okay. So speaking specifically about employed neurologists, employed physicians, a lot of times within that benefit package, they have those retirement plans. Is that enough, or should they also be thinking of doing anything outside of that as far as adding more to their retirement plans? Yeah,
I think typically for physicians and higher income earners, no, it's not enough, right? Because the 401k, you get capped out at about $23,000 a year for the 2023 year. And then if you're over the age of 50, you've got a $7,000 catch-up provision. And so the max someone over the age of 50 can put in is $30,000 a year. For someone under 50 is $23,000 a year that they can contribute to the 401k. And typically that's not enough for someone who's, living a lifestyle that they want to take into retirement, right? Mm-hmm. It's just not enough money. So there's other opportunities that, I think higher net worth earners need to look at in terms of putting additional dollars away for retirement.
Okay. All right, so, if you are an employed physician and you change jobs, go to another employer or leave that employer, then what happens to those accounts that are set up through your employment?
Yeah, sure. So once you're no longer working for the employer the 401k is at, my recommendation would be really think about rolling that money over into an IRA. Okay. And here's the reason for that. When you're sitting in a 401k, that 401k company has put together that plan and they have limited investment options. And we've all run into that, right? You sign up for your 401k, there's maybe 20 investment options, and they ask you, where do you want to allocate your funds? Well, when that money moves out of the 401k into the IRA, you now as an individual investor can invest in almost anything that a brokerage firm could offer, right? Okay. And so you're not limited to those 20 investment elections. And then the second thing is, once you're no longer an employee of the company, they don't have a lot of concern for you, right? So your money's sitting in a plan that's with an employer that you no longer have a relationship with, which is not the greatest idea in the world.
It's an important point to summarize, but certainly with retirement, it sounds like it's never too early to start planning.
No, never. Never.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't wait too late either.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So we'll shift gears a little bit, and I'd like to touch on a topic that you really don't hear enough about, I think, but in talking with financial planners, it's very important. Neurologists are known as cerebral doctors. We think we don't do as many procedures or things with our hands, but I don't think we think enough about disability insurance and what happens if, for some reason, I become disabled. How do I get coverage for that, and what is enough coverage? So can you talk a little bit more about the importance of getting disability insurance and how neurologists should think about that?
Absolutely, and I think it really merges in disability and life insurance together, Dr.
Okay.
Patton, because especially for a doctor, but anybody, but specifically a doctor, you've gone through years and years and years of school, and when you get out and you start practicing, and you think about the assets you have at that time, right? Your number one asset as a doctor is you, because you've earned the right now to go into a profession where you're going to earn a significant income. And so let's just say, you're getting paid $400,000 a year and you got 30 years that you're going to practice. That's $12 million that you're going to earn over your lifetime. And so what is disability coverage? What is it insuring? It's insuring your income. That if something happens to you, you're still going to get that income or a majority of that income through your disability coverage. And it's interesting that you say, well, we're cerebral doctors. One of the interesting statistics from a disability standpoint is I think 60 to 65% of the actual disabilities that occur are for mental issues, not physical issues.
I didn't know that.
And so when you think about Alzheimer's or getting in a major car accident where you lost some of your mental faculties, things of that nature, the disability is caused by cerebral issues, not physically being able to do your job,
Yeah, and that's a very important point, because I don't think we appreciate or think of that enough. We often think of disabilities, of course, losing something going on with your hands or your limbs, but that cognitive aspect as well is very important. Okay.
Yeah, and it's if you don't think about it, right, it doesn't have to be the catastrophic that I just talked about, right?
Sure.
It could be depression because you've lost someone in your family. It could be high anxiety that comes on later in life, those things that you see every day as you sit with your patients, right? Those things don't allow that person to act in their job to the full extent, and then partial disability or full disability comes into play. And then the other thing I would just touch on real quick in a disability policy is when you go to get disability, you'll notice that you can't get coverage for 100% of what you earn, right? So if you're making $400,000 a year, it's going to be very hard for you to go out and find a disability policy that covers you for $400,000 a year.
Okay.
But the major thing to keep in mind is when you buy disability insurance, you're using after-tax dollars to pay that premium.
Okay.
And so your disability benefit comes back tax-free.
Okay.
So if you're making $400,000 a year, you probably are getting about $250 net coming back after tax. And so if you have $250,000 of coverage, you're getting the same income as if you had $400,000 that's being taxed. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Similar question to the retirement question, specifically for those docs that are employed. Are those policies that are offered in contracts, are they typically enough, or should you be looking to add to your disability coverage?
Yeah, it really all depends on the actual policy that your employer has, right? I've seen some employers that will cover 66% of gross, and that's a pretty good coverage where you're getting fully covered. And there's others that are less than that where you might want to go out and get outside coverage to bolt on to your employer coverage so you have enough coverage, right?
Okay.
Yep.
Now, I can attest, I'm guilty of this. I rarely look at my disability coverage. How often should neurologists be looking at this coverage or updating it and so forth?
Yeah, so once you're properly insured from a disability perspective, the main concerns where you want to go back and review your coverage is when you have significant increases in your salary, right? And so if you start out at 400, I always get $400,000, but you start out at 400,000, you got proper coverage, and then you get, go to a new job and they're paying you $550. Well, you now know you have $150,000 that's not covered because you've increased your income. And so just taking a look at those policies as your income fluctuates, hopefully upwards, right?
Yeah, hopefully so.
Is really important.
Okay.
And then the other thing that I would say too is, the other question that people have is, well, how long should I carry disability coverage, right? Should it be to age 65, age 67? Should it be a lifetime? I don't think those policies are even out there anymore. And the answer to that question is, how long are you going to work? Because disability coverage really is only good for years in which you're earning income, right? When you get to the point where you're ready to retire, you've amassed enough wealth where you can live off your savings, and you're not subjected to having to have income to live. Then when you start thinking about, well, maybe I don't need disability coverage anymore.
Okay. So Lee, I want to shift now to another topic that's critical for our listeners to understand as well, and that's life insurance. We all want to live forever, but we're not going to, of course. But it's important to make sure that you're covered and that your family is covered if something should happen to you. So in general, can you break down the different types of life insurance policies, from whole to term life and so forth?
Yeah, and so, it can be really confusing out there, Dr. Patton, because there's been so many different insurance products and policies that have come on the market over the last 30 years, but in very general, broad terms, you can think about life insurance in two separate distinctions. The first would be your term life insurance policy. And all term life insurance is what the name tells us it is. And that's, I'm insuring myself for a term. And so whether that be 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, term insurance is really designed to protect you from an income perspective, once again, right? And so if you take a look at, let's go back to that example of the doctor that's making $400,000 a year and he's gonna work another 20 years, right? We know that over the 20 years, he's gonna make $8 million. And so if he wants to protect all of his income, he would go and get an $8 million term policy that would last for the next 20 years as he's working. After he's earned that income, he can drop the policy because he doesn't need the protection any longer. He's actually earned the income, and it's actually come into his household. A permanent policy, and that's when you get into the whole life, variable universal life, the list goes on and on and on. In very general terms, those permanent products have a term insurance component inside of them, but what it allows you to do is allows you to overfund those policies. And because you've overfunded the policies, those policies do not lapse or do not have a term. They're what they call permanent insurance. And so that insurance is going to pay out at your death, whether that be at age of 50 or age of 80, right? You're going to keep that policy through the entire course of your life. And I think that's where the major abuse from insurance comes into place, because in the industry, they'll talk about is human life value. And your human life value is simply how much you make on an annual basis multiplied by the number of years you're going to work. That's your human life value. Your value as a human is based on the income that you can actually earn over the course of the years, right? Well, not everybody needs human life value in a permanent policy. But for their high net worth earners, such as doctors, I'm sure most of you that are listening to this have had this experience where the life insurance agent comes in and tries to sell you this massive whole life policy that costs $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year, right?
Yeah.
And it's unnecessary, in my opinion.
I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into that. There are a lot of myths out there about life insurance policies, different policies depending on your age, your earning potential, and so forth. Help us understand and help the viewers understand as they're talking to their financial advisor or their policy, whoever's going to help them establish these policies. What are some of the myths out there about that, or should you be looking at different types of policies depending on your age or in particular where you are in your career?
I think you need to step back with the client and first ask the questions of, if something were to happen to you today, what would be your wish as far as taking care of your family, paying off assets? What would be your ultimate wish if something were to happen to you? And once we understand that, you can go into the planning process and know exactly how much money you would need for those different events, right? And once we understand that, then go to actual insurance products and pick the right products that are available to create the plan that's going to take care of that need, if you will. It's right back to the retirement discussion we just had, right? A lot of life insurance agents will do the same thing where your life insurance policy, let's say it's an $8 million policy, it pays out because you passed away, and now the plan is never to touch the $8 million of principal. We're just going to live off of the dividends and the interest and the earnings, right? And I know many families that have the goal of passing $8 million from generation to generation, right?
Sure.
And so maybe the widow and the kids only need $3 million because they're going to take principal and interest as they take that money from those life insurance proceeds, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Lee, this has been a very interesting, informative discussion, and very important for our listeners to think about these things that we often don't think about as far as are we actually covered. So are there any other takeaway points or nuggets you want to leave for our listeners today?
I think just specific to the group that we're talking about today, right? And I've alluded to this already, but they're in that net worth and earned income space where they got a lot of people calling on them, right? Mm-hmm. And so much so that typically the front desk person or the administrative person in your practice, they've been trained on how to get rid of all the callers, right? Don't let them through. I don't want to talk to them, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important that the doctors out there have relationships with advisors that they trust.
Sure.
And then spend a good deal of time really understanding what specifically they can do for their situation to help them save money, accumulate money, and build the life they want to after they stop working, right?
Absolutely.
And that's so important. And everyone's a little different, right? But at the end of the day, there's specific strategies that are in play for higher net worth earners that work well for them, that don't work well for people that are in other income levels, right?
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. You need to tailor it to you and your situation.
Yeah.
And as more physicians are doing different types of practice styles, from employed to our independent practitioners, business owners, and so forth, there's no cookie cutter way to this. I mean, you have to find a good advisor and figure out between disability, life insurance, and retirement, the right plans that work for you.
And that's got even more important after 2018, after President Trump brought the CARES Act out and CARES 2.0. 2018 was a bad year for W-2 employees because it took away a lot of deductions that they used to have that they can no longer take because they're W-2 only, right? Mm-hmm. So the strategy for someone who's employed at one of the major hospitals here in Houston compared to someone who might have their own private practice is completely different. Because when you're self-employed, you've got a lot of other options that the W-2 employee doesn't.
Mr. Daniels, thank you so much for taking time out and educating us on this very important topic.
It was a pleasure, Dr. Patton.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us for this edition of the Business of Neurology. Please tune in and stay tuned for future episodes and installments into this video series.